My dad is the laziest man in the world. See, watch. Dad, we need to have some water.
Well, yeah, here I am. What do you want me? You wanted me to get some water?
Yeah.
Well, I have a problem. I have a problem with this. There's a hole in the bucket, dear son, dear son. There's a hole in the bucket, dear son, a hole.
Well, then fix it, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. Then fix it, dear daddy, fix it.
With what shall I fix it, dear son, dear son? With what shall I fix it, dear son? With what?
That's an easy question. That's an easy answer. With some straw, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. With some straw, dear daddy, some straw.
So the straw is green.
I do
But
not know
look, the straw is too long, too long, too long. But the straw is too long, too long, too long.
Well, then cut it, dear Henry. Dear daddy,
I'm Henry.
dear daddy.
Call me Henry if you want.
Well, then cut it, dear daddy, cut it.
Okay, but with what shall I cut it, dear son, dear son? With what shall I cut it, dear son? With what?
With the knife, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. With the knife, dear daddy, a knife.
But the knife is too dull, too dull, too dull. That the knife is too dull, too dull, too dull.
Well, then sharpen it, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. Well, then sharpen it, dear daddy, sharpen it.
With what shall I sharpen it, dear son, dear son? With what shall I sharpen it, dear son? With what?
Do I have to do everything around here? With some rocks, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. With some rocks, dear daddy, some rocks.
But the rocks are too dry, too dry, too dry. But the rocks are too dry, too dry, too dry.
Well, then wet it, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. Well, then wet it, dear daddy, wet it.
With what shall I wet it, dear son, dear son? With what shall I wet it, dear son? With what?
With some water, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. With some water, dear daddy, some water.
Well, where shall I get it, dear son, dear son? Well, where shall I get it, dear son? Where?
Oh, that's simple. From the stream, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. From the stream, dear daddy, from the stream.
Well, what shall I get it, dear son, dear son? With what shall I get it, dear son? With what?
With the bucket, dear daddy, dear daddy, dear daddy. With the bucket, dear daddy, with the bucket.
But there's a hole in the bucket, my son, my son. There's a hole in the bucket, dear son, a hole.
Thank you. That is, there was a hole in the bucket. The end.